Supervision. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Supervision session number one, talking about supervising street outreach staff and programs. Suzanne Wagner and Andrea White is with me. She's going to wave. And we're going to be your facilitators, but I'm going to turn it over to Molly to welcome everyone from Demas.
Hey, everybody. On behalf of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, thanks for joining this afternoon. We know that outreach is a really particular type of program. We want to make sure that supervisors are getting the support that they need. So please take advantage of the session. All questions are good questions. We're hoping that folks are really involved. And I really hope that you guys get as much out of this as you can and don't walk away feeling like, oh, geez, I should have asked that question. Go ahead and ask it. What we found from past trainings is you have a lot to teach us. And so often we come out of these trainings, learn about something that needs to be fixed. So that's also really helpful feedback. Appreciate everybody being here today and taking the time.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Molly.
Molly.
And Andrea and I are from Housing Innovations, and we've been providing a lot of support to street outreach. This is one of our favorite projects. And we're both social workers and have done a lot of work with homeless folks over the years. So I have a lot of respect for what you guys do and also for your time. We know you're busy, especially supervisors. We're going to talk about supervisor roles, and it takes up slides and slides and slides and slides because there is so much to do. So our goals are really to be relevant to, as Molly said, to learn from you, to give you guys a chance to connect with each other, make new connections. We have breakout groups today and polls to get a little sense of who else is in the room, make some connections, and then hopefully have things you can use right away in your work. We don't have any time for waiting. Hopefully there'll be something, at least one or two nuggets from the day that you can take right away to work with you. Um, as you know, we're recording the slides and the recordings. Andrea's gonna, or if she hasn't already done it, but she probably did, pop the slides in the chat. And the recordings will go up on the website, so you can view them later. And feel free to use the materials in any way that's helpful. We love to see your faces, so I'm going to say hi, KTH Terrian, Courtney, Journey Home One, Miracle, Lynette, Hebe, Stephanie, BB. Hi. As you turn on your cameras, I'm calling you out. It's like Miss Louise. You could look that up if you don't know what Wonderama was, I think is what it was called a long time ago. Erin, I see you. Okay. So we love it to see your faces, but we also know sometimes you're not camera ready. There may be stuff going on. Do what you're comfortable with. We do have breakouts, and we like, to ask you to turn your cameras on so you can meet some new folks.
Yes.
If you have a special way you want to be addressed, that's not the way your name is showing, like mine says Suzanne Wagner, you can change that by just rolling over your picture, and there's some three dots up there where you could rename yourself. We love interaction. We have polls, we have breakouts, but we also are totally open. If people have things to say during the course of the session, don't wait for us to ask. Just get our attention somehow. You can raise your hand, you can type in the chat. You could just unmute yourself and start talking. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened in a session. And then we don't really have enough time to go around and have everybody introduce yourselves. We have, how many people do we have in the room? It's a pretty big crowd. 27, yeah. So if you would just put in the chat your name, what agency you're from, your location, where you are in the state, because this is a statewide training. And we like to kind of set the level. It's Thursday. You've already had a busy week, got another day and a half to get through till the weekend. So clear the deck a little bit and think about this like little fantasy question. If you could go anywhere in the world for a month and money was no object, where would you go? And it could be multiple places. It could be nowhere. So let's see where you got. I love to travel myself. It always gives me a nice warm fuzzy feeling to think about exciting places.
Oh,
Molly wants to
Mykonos, Greece,
see in
or New
France.
Haven. New Haven's a good place to go.
Mykonos, Greece. Yes, Mykonos, beautiful. New Haven. Yes. Go to the Barbados, Portugal,
Portugal.
Japan, Japan for a month. If my friends just came back from Japan, I've never been. Thailand, Ireland, and Greece.
Nice.
Ireland is beautiful. I haven't been there in ages. I'm getting my warm fuzzies from this. New Zealand, another place I've never been.
California's nice too. Ireland.
Oh yeah, California is beautiful. Barcelona, great. Italy, yes, beautiful place. Ireland, a lot of Ireland. We could do a group trip, an outreach trip to Ireland. Do they have some fascinating what they call rough sleeping, in the UK and Ireland, and some really fascinating programs. I think there was a contingent from Connecticut that went to England a few years ago, maybe. I think so. Hawaii, yes,
We
Hawaii,
came
Hawaii,
from
Hawaii,
over there.
beautiful. What he be?
We have interns that they came from UK.
Hmm.
Ah,
Nice.
Yeah,
nice. Don't you have to go over and make sure they get home okay, Gibby?
we try. No
You
budget.
tried. Okay.
The housing commissioner and some of the executive directors went over to Ireland 2 years ago, I think, maybe. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, thank you. Somebody who's been around. Okay, great. Well, hopefully that gave you some nice warm fuzzies thinking about travel. Meantime, back to reality now. As we said, we love interactions. We've learned that some of you don't have working mics on your computers. So we have breakouts, and if you want to talk, just you can connect by your phone. So you have the phone number here. There's no one touch mobile. It says one touch mobile, but it's a lie because I've actually tried to call in by phone. You have to put all these numbers in, but sorry about that. But grab a screenshot if you don't have the slides and you need to call it. So what are we going to be doing today? Andrew and I've been doing a whole series of trainings, ongoing trainings for outreach. And we just finished the best practices series that's really for everybody. Kind of what are the requirements for outreach, the expectations, what are important strategies to make outreach effective and getting people into housing and all that jazz. And then this is really for you guys who are supervising or maybe want to be supervisors, because everyone's welcome, but it is targeted to supervisors. So if you're interested, that's fine. We're going to talk about a model of supervision by Alfred Kadushin. We're going to talk about the goals of supervision. What are we trying to accomplish here? The different roles that you have in outreach, and it is a very um, what's the word? There's a lot of tasks, there's a lot of strategies, a lot of things to attend to. So we'll talk about those roles, and how do we accomplish all that work, right? Because there is a lot to do, from monitoring the practice to making sure you have coverage to, having a plan to coordinating with partners to getting resources for your team. And what are some structures that can support that work? And then we'll talk a little bit about specialized supports and outreach supervision, see things that are really particular to the practice of outreach, where we expect staff to be working with landlords sometimes, where we are working on helping people learn how to be a good tenant as we try to move them into housing, and how do we provide that support. So, and then we'll wrap it up. And then next week we'll pick up with adult learning and get into some of the nitty gritty around some of the data stuff and outcomes and some of the other responsibilities of outreach. So I think you all know this, that your focus is on helping people make a transition to a home in the community with supports. That's the goal of outreach. Right. In the meantime, we obviously want to keep people alive. We want to help people with medical issues and other basic needs that they have as they are struggling outside to make that connection to housing. But really, the end goal we're trying to do is get people into someplace safe, and that's decent, and connected up with supports. The model we use, and I love the Kadushin model, and you'll see we have the reference for the book on the next slide. It's a really simple model because it talks about three key roles as a supervisor, and as I get older, remembering more than three things becomes a challenge, right? So It's focused on the roles of the supervisor as really as a teacher, as teaching people how to do their jobs or arranging training for them, and making sure people know what the goals of the program are, what they're trying to be doing, like the fact that we are trying to get people into housing, and making sure people know how to do the work. How do you engage someone? How do you do a service plan? Supporting staff is the second piece. So educating is first, supporting is second, because it is tough work. It's hard, the things people experience outside are really hard, the things people see, the things people have been through. And then also, not to mention the challenges of finding housing in this market and with the resources that we have. So it's a tough job. So staff need a lot, and we don't pay them $1 million a year. So support comes in other forms besides money, and it comes a lot from supervisors and the things that supervisors arrange to support staff. Keep their motivation up, help them develop skills, help them think about professional development. I think that's a key piece. We'll see that on the next slide. And then the third piece is administrative. So support, education, and administration, making sure you're monitoring the goals, the paperwork, all that jazz, being in compliance with the regulations and the standards. And it's not all your job, right? Supervising, you're not responsible for everything, although it may feel like you are responsible for everything. Um, but you exist in organizations. Some of you are in big organizations, some of you are in smaller organizations. So the level of support varies, but you supervisors need support, and the agency can support the work by having good policies and procedures, by providing, ensuring that supervision is provided, which we know in Connecticut is really important. Having good HR departments that support the kind of people we need in outreach, because outreach is a special practice, right? Is everybody cut out for outreach? No. You all know when you see someone who's going to be a good outreach worker, right? You can tell, usually you can tell within a minute of meeting someone. And it is a very special role. So we want support from the agency around hiring the kind of people we need to do the job. That was something we struggled a lot with because of the agency Andrea and I worked at for a long time and had a lot of educational requirements for a lot of positions. And sometimes that was not necessarily the most educated person was not necessarily the best person for the job, right? We know that about outreach, right? You can learn in the field. We also need resources so that P staff can be out in the field, that they have resources for clients, that they also have resources like, laptops and access to software, and then of course training. And then I think the most important thing, and we're going to say it at the beginning and we're going to say it at the end, I think oftentimes you get promoted to a supervisor, and I know this happened to me at different points in my career. People think you're good. They think, all right, you're good. You're the supervisor. You're going to run this outreach program, and maybe 3 other programs, the rapid rehousing and maybe a PSH on top of that, or maybe you're running the shelter. But supervisors deserve and need support too. And if you're not getting support, just really want to give a shout out for that. And hopefully some of the things that Molly and her team at Demas really have put together a great program of support with the quarterly meetings and the trainings and a lot of providing tools and supports. But the communities of practice that Andrea runs are an opportunity to get some support around the complicated stuff that comes up in the work. But make sure you are getting support, because you got to have gas in your tank to be able to put gas in the staff's tank. That's how I like to think about it. All right, so let's get a sense of who's in the room today. So first question, we have a poll. It's got 3 questions. How long have you been a supervisor? Less than a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10, over 10. Have you received training on being a supervisor? We did do this training last year. It is adapted this year, adjusted because we have new topics. And then do you yourself receive individual supervision from your supervisor, one-on-one meetings? It may not be every week, but do you ever get it? We're going to putting the bar kind of low there. Okay. Give people a few more seconds. We have to look in your calendar, especially the people who've been around for a long time. Okay, we have I'm seeing a spread. Okay. All right, we're going to give it 2 more seconds and 1 full minute, and we're going to end the poll and share the results. Okay. All right, so we do have a spread, although it tips towards very experienced over 10 years for almost 40% of the people. Between 6 years, over 6 years, we've got 56% of the people. So little more than half are over 6 years, and that means the other half are less. Okay, so like I think most of our trainings, we end up having a real spread, which is great because the experienced folks, I'm sure, have lots of stories and tricks and tips that they carry around with them. And as you meet each other and talk and share in the sessions, we'd love to hear people's ideas. And then, have you received training on being a supervisor? That's 3/4 of you. Okay, which is great. And do you receive individuals? 94% of you receive individual supervision. I'm gonna give that a round of applause.
Mm-hmm.
I think Connecticut, and Andrea and I work all around the country. Many of you know that. What is the biggest gap in programs? Well, there's many gaps, but one of the biggest gaps is supervisors for direct service staff, and then supervisors for supervisor. That's even more rare. So Connecticut is really got really good practice going on. So I just want to check thank you, Shannon. Put the phone information in the chat. Okay, and Sylvia's going to Rhode Island beaches. Okay, very good. All right. So let me just go a little deeper into the Kadushin model. There's the reference. It's Supervision and Social Work. It was the 5th edition. I think they're working on a 6th edition because it has been such a good resource, and I think really reads very easily. And if you're a reader and you like to read and learn by reading, I highly recommend the book. And this really just kind of elaborates what I said in the introduction: the administrative function, the educational function, and the supportive function, right? Especially want to talk about thinking about professional development, because I think that was a real deal maker for us when we worked at CUCS, was a lot of support for staff to we created ladders for staff. I know in small agencies it can be tough, but we created ladders for staff who had more experience. We did some tuition reimbursements. We tried to do really opportunities for people to learn how to train or professionally develop. So I think that supportive component, even though it's third, is really important. And especially with outreach work, which is so hard, right? It's very rewarding and amazing when people get housing, but in the meantime, along the road, there are definitely some bumps. So the administrative piece, making sure that I think the thing I didn't talk about under administrative, but maybe I did, but I'll reinforce it, is getting resources for staff. I think that's also a key role for supervisors, is advocating for agencies to have resources to do the work. And that changes over time, and then education. So hopefully you find that model. And as you're thinking about supervising folks and you're having individual meetings, since you guys do that, are you attending to these 3 things? Now, sometimes you got to focus on the administrative stuff because the person hasn't done any notes in 4 months, right? And that really is, or any service plan. So that's what we're going to focus on. But in general, you want to give yourself a little check-in as you're having meetings. Are we thinking about skill development, knowledge development? Are we thinking about the outcomes of the program? And are we thinking about the support that the staff person needs? Like maybe they aren't doing the notes, but it's really because they're burned out, right? And then really we want to be thinking about, yes, we got to say we need the notes, but we also want to think about how are we going to help that staff person have enough gas in their tank. And I'll use that metaphor because I really do feel like that's a big part of what we're doing, is doing a lot of feeding staff and nurturing staff to have the energy to do this work, is that they may need some help decompressing, prioritizing, stress relieving, managing in order to do the notes, right? So it's not strictly administrative. Okay, I think I don't see anything in the chat. Feel free to jump in, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrea now.
Thanks, Suzanne. So let's talk a little bit about the goals of supervision. So Suzanne covered a lot of what supervision covers, and we want to think about, supervision teamwork and agency support as a way to really support the practice of the people that are on the direct line. So we always want to support and motivate staff, and there's a number of ways to do that, and we're going to talk about those specific ways in a minute. We want to help people provide high quality services, and Suzanne talked about that. We want to, provide that educational piece. We want to provide that support piece. We want to provide the recognition of when people are really doing a great job. We want to help people understand the program goals and outcomes and talk about their piece in that, achieving those outcomes. And we want to help people with resources. And that's a key area. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But that people often need help in connecting to those resources, and the supervisor is the pathway to that. You may need help from the administrative staff, but it's looking for those patterns of where expectations aren't met through those resources and helping people make those connections. It's also helping people with advanced clinical needs. I know that people have said they are seeing people who are more vulnerable than they've seen in past years, and it's really helping people make those clinical connections, but also deal with those clinical challenges. And it's also helping them develop skills in that knowledge base, which is part of the educational piece.
I just want to, emphasize what Andrea talked about the complex needs. And I always think about myself as a new or, worker, and how complex and it is to understand what's going on with the folks that we're
Mhm.
serving, because I think the rate of head injury among homeless people is like 10 times the general population, right? We know that there's aging, people are aging. We also know mental illness is there, and substance use, and traumatic brain injuries, which did I just say? Forgot it. But
Mhm.
anyway, there's so much going on. It can be really hard to figure out, what am I seeing with this person? And very often people have so many layers of experience and issue that help understanding what's going on with people, I think, is one of the most important things that you guys can provide, especially those folks who've been around for a long time, where maybe 10 things are happening with a person, but you could probably guess them all within about 10 minutes of talking with somebody, right? And figure out what's going on. But these are the most complicated clinical challenges usually in your town or your city or your wherever you are in the state.
Oh. So let's talk about people understanding their roles and how housing stability and housing access really keys into that, and people understanding their role there. And we're going to talk about understanding their role also in connecting to those resources and getting that clinical consultation. That's very important, that staff, and also that staff not feel like they have to do everything, but that they have help. And that's a big part of supervision is, you know, offering that to people. It's helping people with problem solving, which is huge. And, sometimes I felt like my whole job as a supervisor was to get the staff to take a breath, right? Is that, you're working with somebody, it's scary, it's something's going on, you can't figure it out, you feel all this pressure to solve it. Is like take a breath, think about what they're seeing, and really working on problem solving skills is really important. We talked a little bit about sharing resources and access to new resources, particularly when Suzanne was talking about, these complicated clinical pictures, is that people aren't going to come in knowing how to make a contact with a neurologist or a traumatic brain injury clinic, and helping people make those connections is going to be really important. It's making sure that, documentation was never my thing, but a big part of supervision is making sure the documentation is done, but also making sure that the documentation really fits the role and that it's helpful to people, and explaining that connection. Documentation really does drive the work, and we want to really watch that and help people with do that. Um, It's also, making sure that there's enough people there and that people have time to really work with clients. So it's not only coverage, but it's really balancing out people's caseloads on an ongoing way so that they have time to provide the services that they need to provide. And everybody's going to have a bunch of high need people and a bunch of medium need people and maybe a bunch of low need people, and those needs will shift. And it's really watching that balance, which is critically important. Because if you've ever had a caseload with all high need people, and I bet everybody in this room has, right? It's hard to prioritize and you need some help. So it's sort of moving that around a little bit. It's also safety and ensuring people are safe in the field and feel safe and can help the people we serve feel safe, because nobody does well when they're panicked or when they're scared. And so we want to make sure that that's going on. We want to highlight best practices, both within the team's practice, but also other types of best practices, using those case conferences to do some of that. We want to look at patterns. A lot of you guys have been in this field for a long time, and Suzanne said sometimes it only takes us 10 minutes. That's because we're starting to recognize patterns. Oh, I saw this with somebody else. Okay, I saw this with somebody else. I saw that this is what helped. Let's talk about this. This might be a possibility. You want to really lend that expertise. And you also want to really look at the practice critically in a supportive way, making sure that we're really highlighting the things that people are doing right, but also pulling apart the things that don't work. And staff desperately want that. They've got to trust the process. But that's really important, and really taking those suggestions and taking those patterns that we're seeing amongst the staff to really inform our program planning and talk about that. Okay. Do you want to say something, sir? Okay. So I want to point out this picture. Did you ever feel like this? I mean, I did think that maybe this person should be riding a unicycle, because that's the way I felt when I was a supervisor, right? Trying to balance everything, trying to grab at everything, right? So that it's a lot of balls in the air, right? Because you're coordinating staff activities. We talked about this, managing caseloads, that sort of thing, making sure everybody's covered, making sure that people are being seen on a regular basis, right? You're doing all of that. You're leading the team, you're mentoring people, you're motivating people, you're meeting with people individually as well as in team meetings and staff meetings. You're providing education and training in staff meetings as well. You're, scheduling case reviews and looking at cases and bringing in that clinical consultation. We talked about managing the assignments and caseloads. We're talking about, providing staff orientation, because unfortunately in this field, we got a lot of turnover and there's always somebody to orient and teach how to do that. And it's also getting your team to help you do that. It's also that documentation we talked about. We're talking about advocating for resources. And this really specifically calls out, sometimes you need the administration, the agency administration to help you with that. But it's recognizing those patterns, whether in supervision or team meeting, or making those connections yourself about what people are going to need help with. It's also bringing in Molly and Demas to help you with those connections. And it's also about, being a cheerleader and recognizing progress on the team, and really cheerleading for those small goals. Because if we're only waiting for the end result, right? If we only cheer for when people get into housing, it's going to be a wait. And that people have to be recognized for the process that gets towards those goals and how this is positive. And that's how they become like a learned skill. Okay. So it's also developing those relationship with the community resources. Sometimes that's going to have to be done directly by the supervisor, particularly if you have more than one person using that resource. Um, it's, getting that clinical consultation, whether it be from programs you refer to, whether it be within your own program, whether it would be within the system that Demas has set up, whether it be however it is, and getting that clinical consultation that's specific to your team's needs. So oftentimes things like A nurse to talk about diabetes meds might be incredibly helpful, and that's a clinical consultation, or a neuropsychiatrist or a psychiatrist who works with elderly people, getting them to consult on those things. And if they can see people afterwards, that's even better. It's also looking at your program policies and procedures to ensure that they really support the work. I know I'm talking at you really fast. You should feel free to, like, I don't know, raise your hand, stop me anytime. You also want to do, we talked about really pulling apart the work. So you want to do some program evaluation. You want to use the tools there. Maybe you want to go over the monitoring guide, or you want to go over something like that with people to understand. You definitely want to go over outcomes with them to take a look and let people make suggestions. You want to help people with time management because that's always an issue in this field. You got to manage budgets, you got to manage those timesheets and evaluations, preparing reports. These are all your favorite things, I'm aware. And finally, you want to have celebrations to recognize success and recognize talent, right? So the other thing that we often suggest to supervisors is that if somebody's really good at something, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but if somebody's really good at something, make them the expert. People really appreciate that, and it's good for staff development. So if there are others, and I'm sure there are with supervisors, right? And Suzanne mentioned the other one and see all the time in Connecticut is this is not your only program, right? But if there are others there, please put them in the chat.
Other responsibilities, you mean?
Yes,
And
yes,
roles.
yes. Okay, so we're going to move to a little bit of a group discussion. Introduce yourselves, your name, your agency, the length of time you were as a supervisor. We realize you put that in the poll, but we don't know who's who, so it's sometimes helpful in these small groups to know that. Um, and then share an amazing experience you had with a supervisor, something where something just clicked. Evaluate talents in your team and teach self-care. Those are good ones. Thank you. So, something the supervisor did with you that was helpful, instructive, it could be at any point in your career, otherwise changed your approach, solved your problem, gave you the tools to do something hard, something new. Discuss what was most helpful in your supervision experience. So, we're going to give you 10 minutes. And we're going to divide you up into groups, and Suzanne's going to share this to the group. Shannon, can you pause that recording? Thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted you to know that when we break out questions, we could hear your conversations.
Oh,
Yeah, in the break live.
okay. God, we didn't say
Well,
anything horrible, did we?
thanks for letting us know
Well,
that.
thanks for letting us know. So what'd you think of this conversation? Was it a good conversation? It looked like you guys were really talking. Sometimes it's kind of fun to talk about your your positive supervisory experiences and just reflect on that. And we don't often get a chance to do that. You guys all look thrilled by this conversation. What'd you think? Did you hear something interesting? Did you hear something you want to apply? Did you hear something? Did you get a chance to talk about it yourself? What'd you do?
I'll share a story.
Okay.
So I'll take the risk unless someone else wants to share one. But I think one of my best experiences with a supervisor was where I was working in a program, residential program for runaway and homeless youth. And this young woman who was about 17 was having some difficulties that I did not know what was going on. But my supervisor immediately, I saw that, knew that she was hearing voices, probably for maybe the first time, but certainly early voices. And we sat together with her and he talked to her about it and drew it out of her with such kindness and gentleness that she could share everything. And then he proceeded to convince her to go to the hospital, to the psychiatric hospital for an evaluation. And I watched him do that. And I never had to ask a question about how to hospitalize somebody again. I felt like I learned it by watching. And it was so informative and, just taught me a lot about being a supervisor and how, because I tend to talk about things, but showing people how to do the work can really, really, really be powerful. And if I read that policy of how to do it, read it in a textbook, I never would have learned it that day, that's for sure. And I'm going to tell you, it's many decades ago. I'm still telling you that story. So, um, and I think it taught me a lot about what to be as a supervisor and also about different, and we're going to talk about learning styles next time, but people have different ways of learning. And, I tend to be a reader, but I actually learned a lot by watching him model good practice. Anybody else want to share? I didn't give somebody the,
I think it's funny that, those of us of a certain age may not have any recent experience. I have to go back to the 70s.
well, I was a little later than you, but not that far, much later, but yes.
Well, I was still in school. I mean, I was still a kid. I told them it was my father. He was fantastic. What can I tell you?
Well, that's great. Okay, well, we don't need to belabor it.
Nope. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that we provide supervision. One is individual meeting. We're going to talk about these in detail. So this is just sort of an overview slide. So you don't think I'm saying, okay, you got this, we're done. Some is individual meetings, and they're specifics on each one. Some are team meetings, some are case conferencing. We've done a lot of that in Connecticut. Some are clinical consultation, modeling. That's something that Suzanne talked about. Sort of field work and home visits, going with people or a senior staff going with people and teaching people about home visits, which is huge. Working with community resources, how to work with landlords, that's huge. Because that's not a natural skill. And, Suzanne often says they don't teach us in high school how to manage a lease. Well, they didn't teach us either, right? So not only we got to help them manage a lease, but we got to teach people how to manage a lease. So this is complicated. So getting some help with that. And then they also provide staff training and support. So if we're going to talk about individual meetings, the preference is weekly, though, and you guys will talk about this in a while, but see if that can happen. Also, make the time sacred. I can't tell you how many times I got to move in today. I got to go for an inspection. I got to do this sort of stuff. Pretty much anything would happen and come up. You really make the time with the supervisor sacred and don't change it for a lot of reasons. Ask everybody to come in with agenda items. So you want people to be an active participant. We talk about this with people we serve all the time, but we also want this with staff and supervisors. We want everybody to have some skin in the game. Or one of the things a friend of mine said is, this is a process where you have to be equally yoked, where everybody's pulling in the same direction. And part of that is getting that agenda done. You want to also.
I just want to say, I think that if you have workers who have not worked in human services before, which a lot of outreach workers are entry level, or maybe it may be an early, although some have been around for a long time, I know it's a mix. But in a lot of other industries, not bringing problems to your supervisor is the goal.
Yes.
So the idea that people will bring an agenda of things they're struggling with, or things they want to talk about, or that they need help with, or they want your opinion on, is something that people need to be socialized to. That it's not a failure to
Mm-hmm.
bring something to supervision, right? It's not your job to not bring things to me. It's the opposite, right? We want people to think about their work and be proactive in bringing us issues and creating an environment where everybody's always learning, and that people are thinking about how am I going to use my time, right? Because it's a joint time supervision. It's time for you to get your things done, but it's also time for them to teach them how to use that time most effectively.
Yeah, it's a really important point, is you want to really encourage people to do that, and people tend to be reluctant to do that. They also tend to be worried that if they bring things up, that they'll be sort of punished for it. We want to really make sure that people understand that that's not the case. That everybody, if people weren't struggling with this job, then they're probably not doing this job, right? So that, struggle is a normal part of the process. We want to orient the staff to the mission, the goals by pointing out how what they're doing is going and contributing to outcomes, to mission, to goals. We're also helping them integrate the concepts that we're teaching, anything from housing-based case management to housing stabilization services to housing problem solving. We want to think about the interventions and the participants' goals and help them go deeper, right? And there's a lot of things that are really hard for staff to do, right? And going deeper on goals is one of them. People say, "Oh, I want to get sober, I want to take my medication, and I want to move into housing." It's like, "Yay, we're done," right? But are you done? No. So you want to help people do that and not feel bad about it, and push back around those things. You want to help review the interventions. You want to help people make progress and help people reframe the goals if they're not working for people. It's not, or in normalizing the step back. That's a very normal process with a lot of people we work with. It's a normal process in my life, is that people often have to step back. You want to normalize that for people because people hold themselves responsible for that. You also want to provide support around what people are hearing and what people are seeing. That vicarious trauma is very real for the staff. It may be triggering their own trauma, but it may also be, it's really hard to watch people struggle and watch people suffer like this. Yes, we're helping, but you know what? It often feels it's not fast enough. And helping staff to cope with that when they have to go home and they know this person's still on the street is a very tough thing, and really focusing on that. And a lot of that is, like Heavy said, it's a lot of it is, helping people with self-care, helping people modulate their expectations while still being hopeful. That's a really important part of this process. So, one of the things we're going to do is really focus on the proactive. Crisis is a big part of everybody's life, and we're going to focus on the crisis prevention. It's one of the things that we talked about a little bit before about, we have to recognize small things, and prevention doesn't look as wow as an intervention, but prevention is really important. And if we can reduce the number and reduce how people respond to crisis, that's huge. And we want to really recognize that. Once again, I said this before and did say we're going to come up here, is that encouraging staff to train on their areas of expertise. Like if somebody's really good at SSI, we had somebody on our staff who was like the landlord whisperer, and she helped everybody else with that. That was incredible. Or somebody who can always get a psychiatric appointment or really knows how to talk to doctors. That's something that we want to really help people talk about and help people with. And it gives people a sense of accomplishment. And it also gives people a sense of pride in their work. And it lets people, and that might turn into something. We want to make sure that they understand the roles of the other team members and the other partner agencies, that they're holding people responsible for following through. A big problem with case managers, particularly in outreach, is you tend to take on the weight of the world. And if somebody's not going fast enough, you take it on. You want to help modulate some of that. You also want to provide that guidance on, documentation and assessments, and that guidance on why these are important and how these help people. So it's not only providing guidance and providing oversight, it's also helping people integrate the concepts that are in an assessment and how those come to setting goals with people, that sort of thing. And it's also making sure that every participant is reviewed on a regular basis. And that can be really hard, right? It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to pay attention to something if it's not on fire, literally, right? And that really making sure that everybody gets some of the attention they deserve. And I just want to recognize that that's a big part of crisis prevention, because if people see that the only people getting attention are the people in crisis, they're going to go into crisis. Right? It's a natural thing. So we want to really recognize that. And finally, we want to really look at the outcomes and the performance measures. I mean, those are available to you through HMIS, through reports, that sort of thing. And you want to make sure that you make those available to staff and that they can see where they're making progress. And then that's been hugely important. And you know what else is it also improves people's ability to enter that kind of data. Because if you enter data and you feel like it falls into a big old hole, you're probably not going to be real motivated to do it. But if you can see progress through that, right, that's really going to help people, encourage people to enter it.
I just want to, we did talk about some data and dashboards at the last best practices session with people, so they can drill down to the program level and see different kind of outcomes. And I think that the data being shown to staff of how the program is doing is really important. Like how
Yeah.
many people are getting income and how many people are getting housing and all those things. But we want to be careful too, because we can drill down now to an individual worker level and we can see also how that's going. And so I know that some people are really using that to help inform their supervision. We don't want to use it as a stick. We want to use it as a carrot, and we want to be careful. And I guess I think that I love data myself, even though I'm a social worker. But data can give you a story that maybe is going to feel, not so great. I mean, I think it's hard to get people housing. So when you look at how many people exited to housing, maybe people are going to feel like that's a low number. Maybe they're not. They're going to say we should be getting housing for more people. So it's important to look at data, but also to have a context with it,
Yeah.
make sure people are understanding it. I agree with Andrea. I think if people never see the outcomes, like X percentage of people got health insurance and all these data points that we know you guys are looking at as supervisors, it's not as meaningful to put the information in. But when they see that result coming out, but we want to be careful. I know one supervisor was talking to me about paying her staff bonuses based on how they did in terms of the program outcomes. And I said, okay, well, you come back and let us know how that works after you try it. I think she's still just thinking about it because that was a little bit scary, right? There's so many factors that affect whether a person has positive or negative outcome besides that worker. It can be dangerous. Okay, I'm actually gonna go to team meetings and we're doing a little bit of speed talking here. We want to make sure everybody has the information. But there's a lot on the slides about team meetings. And I think, we do know that you guys do team meetings, but team meetings are a really important part of supervision. So that's a place where I said, right, you guys don't have to do everything. The team is there, and the team is a support in and of itself by definition. And certainly I know from meeting you guys and your teams that you create a supportive environment, but the team meetings do all the same things as supervision, right? They're looking at how we're doing in compliance. They're looking at support needs that come up among staff members. And then they're also an opportunity to teach things and share information, right? So we want to make sure we're tracking folks. I know all of you have different ways that you track people and how they're going, but that's certainly something to talk about in the team meeting about our people on the road to housing. What do we need to do next? Sharing resources. reviewing all the people. I think one thing, that's a really big part of self-care, and Hebe mentioned it, and we're going to talk about it again later, and about people taking care of themselves, is that they take a day off,
Yeah.
or they can be sick, or they can go on vacation to one of those lovely places we just talked about at the beginning of the session. And really having a knowledge on the team, among the team, about different people, so that more than one person can interact with someone. And it's not like Andrea's on vacation and that means the person doesn't interact with anybody, right? And making sure people feel like the outreach team's caseload is the team's caseload, even though people may have individual assignments. Just thinking about sharing the knowledge of what's going on with different people, especially the people that are enrolled with you. And then also just identifying people in crises, right? We know we see folks who are going in and out of different crises. Andrea mentioned this. We want to have a handle on that. We want to certainly, some people are, at risk of overdose. Some people are at risk of freezing to death, although finally it's getting a little warmer. But we want to be thinking about all those potential crises and plans for support for them. And then same as we're doing with our one-on-ones, but the team can be a great opportunity to talk about patterns that are coming up in the work. We keep referring this person to this people to this clinic, and nobody comes back with a good experience, right? So we're using a resource that's not really working. Identifying patterns in the work where, suddenly we're having issues with landlords, right? All of a sudden there's some new things going on with the landlords, or different patterns. So it's also a good place to look at those patterns. Also talk about partners that are, great and not great. I think one thing that in Connecticut, you have the coordinated access network, and the outreach workers need to understand the network and how it works. So we make sure that people are aware of that. And then also identifying where we need some more help, because maybe we are seeing a lot of people who have head injuries, and we want to think about, can we bring in an expert who could do like a mini training for us, maybe evaluate some people? We'll talk more about that as well. Big issue for team meetings is resources. Which resources are working, which resources aren't working, what the shortage is. I know now with certain ID and certain, I think with getting a new social security card, they're now looking for people to come in person, right? If you don't have any ID. And so that's a change. And that can be complicated. And maybe we need to go over the Social Security office that we use in our town and make friends with them. Because, right, if I was going to be sending my people over or bringing my people over, I'd want to make sure I have a contact there, right? So we want to think about new resources that we need to develop. For years, you never went to the Social Security office, right? It was all, they wanted you to do everything online and never come in, don't walk in. Now there's a change. And there's also changes in benefit programs, right? They've changed things around eligibility for different things. Work requirements are coming down. So you also want to be constantly keeping up with our resources. And then we also need to want to identify resources that we need to develop on an agency level. Like, we are going to use this health clinic a lot. We should probably have a memorandum of understanding, or at least a leadership sort of level of connection between the agencies. Every outreach worker can advocate one by one for clients, but sometimes it's more efficient to have a larger organizational relationship. So thinking about that. Team meetings can also be a good place to go over policies and procedures. I will say everyone wants to see your policies and procedures manual, but hardly anyone really wants to read it. I'll
Yeah.
just say that even as a reader, that policies and procedures manuals are not fun. I'm getting a couple of laughs. Thank you. And just taking a policy and going over one in a team meeting, right? So that people do talk about it and what does it mean. We're going to do a session for you guys in June, a couple sessions on safety on outreach. Maybe that's something you do as a team. But looking at policies and procedures, especially things that we want to make sure people are aware of. There also is a place for team building. Maybe have a little food when you have team meetings. Maybe have a little part where people can chat with each other. It's a place to do little trainings in the team meetings. Also deal with coverage issues. Who's going to go over to this area? What's the backup? Andrea's on vacation. When are we in office doing? I know a number of you do um, documentation time or notes time where you're trying to schedule in for people to do their documentation, um, making sure people are, Andrea talked about that before, right? That time management. If you're a street outreach worker, it's real what you really want to be doing is street outreach. You don't really want to be doing notes, right? That's not, but we need the notes. So we want to help people find a way to get that in their day. I just will say I did a lot of notes at home, which is not really where we want people to be doing their notes. Um, so I do remember that in my pajamas as a young worker. Um, but I don't think they knew that I was doing that, but that was because there was no time to do the notes in the work. Okay. So just get a poll, get a sense of your team meeting. So it doesn't say anything here about frequencies, but some of you do daily huddles, some of you do weekly team meetings, some of you do biweekly, some of you do monthly, quarterly, some of you have multiple meetings. Just get a little sense of in the room here, um, team meetings in your shop. So it's a simple poll. How often do you have team meetings and outreach? And we're talking about street outreach daily, weekly, every 2 weeks, monthly, as needed, never. I doubt that's, but we never know. Other people have different ways. We do have group chat. I know a lot of you guys are using group texts among the outreach teams, right? Where people can keep in contact by text on a daily basis, say, oh, I'm over here. I just saw so and so to connect. So sometimes team meetings can be short, they can be long, they can be huddles, they can be 15 minutes, it can be 2 hours. 2 hours is really the max for a meeting, I think, for most of us, but all right, I'll give you another couple seconds if people want to answer the poll. I think we've got a winner here. The most common, so only one person is doing daily, about 50% of you doing weekly. Uh, one again doing every 2 weeks, two of you doing monthly, and then some of you are doing as needed. You might want to just put it on the calendar as a quarterly, even if you are as needed, just to give yourself a trigger to make sure they don't get lost. I'm actually struggling this with myself right now. I have not set up a team meeting in Housing Innovations in a while, and I should just have them in the books. We can always cancel a meeting, but if we don't have one scheduled, it's harder to get it going. So just a couple thoughts about that. So thanks for sharing that. So other things, we've talked about case conferencing and case reviews. Andrea does do a communities of practice on a quarterly basis. I think the next one is in June. We have a slide for that at the end. And that's a model for kind of a case conference and case reviews. This is a great learning technique because there isn't just an answer, right? Like, what is wrong with Suzanne and why can't we get her to fill out the paperwork for her ID? Seems like a simple thing. She won't tell us where she was born. Um, Maybe we'd sit together as a team and we talk about that and brainstorm ways to solve that problem. That case reviews can be a great way for people to learn from each other. People professionally develop by learning how to present a case. I think about that as some of my early learnings was learning how to present a case because you're overwhelmed by the amount of information you have about people and how do you learn how to present something in 10 minutes that's a salient features. And we use an outline. I think that's helpful for people, but it really is a good chance for group learning, right? So get people to have brainstorm on problems, share successes. Look, I was having a really hard time engaging this person. Finally, I was able to engage this person because we went and he wanted to see about signing up for this program. And that was the only thing he was interested in. So we want to use those case reviews. It's really an opportunity for people to help each other, for you not to have to do everything and be the support for everyone, to also get great ideas out on the table. So, there's a lot of science to the work that we try to give you, but we all know there's a lot of art to this work. It isn't, you can't just look up and find the answer to how do I engage this person on Google or AI, ChatGPT, right? We need human input, and so case reviews are a great opportunity. And then this can be an opportunity to bring in a specialist And we definitely want to focus on structures. So when we're thinking about case reviews, and some of you do a more structured case review process than others, some of you are doing like a critical time intervention model, so you're doing regular, sorry, case reviews. But we want to think about when we're doing case reviews, and that may be a separate meeting from a team meeting. Maybe that's a quarterly meeting, maybe that's a monthly meeting where we bring 3 or 4 or 5 people and we look at some of the new folks. We look at some people who might be going into housing to talk about last minute bits that we want to take advantage of. We want to talk about think about people who are having crises or major challenges. When we think about how do we schedule that, we want to make sure that we talk about successes. Again, not enough talk about success. I think we all can focus on the negative, and the case review is an opportunity to boost the team's morale and make people feel like the work is possible, right? By sharing some successes. And this is a CTI recommendation. We should annotate it accordingly, but that everybody that's enrolled in the program is reviewed every 2 weeks to make sure that people aren't overlooked. This wouldn't be for everybody you're outreaching to, but everyone who's enrolled and engaged in a service planning process with you. A recommendation, it can be tough. You might have a lot of cases, but just remember those quiet people who sometimes get lost when they're quiet and they're not on fire. And that might be the time when they're really going into crisis, right? When they're withdrawing from us, where we're not seeing them. They always showed up at the food pantry every Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and now we haven't seen them for 3 weeks. Might want to follow up on that. So we've talked a lot about clinical consultation. I think there's a million ways you can use it, and there's a list input into service plans and assessment. What is going on with Andrea? So maybe it's a neuropsych consult, and they see a client. Maybe they can give us a shared. That maybe they can meet individually with people. We are very fortunate. And I know some of you have really great psychiatry services to have psychiatrists who will go out and meet people in the field. And that can be sometimes really helpful where they can get a sense of what's going on. Sometimes a clinical consultation could be to train staff and understand what are the impacts of a traumatic brain injury on someone's behavior, which are vast. We actually ran a traumatic brain injury program for a while, but there are many, many impacts from traumatic brain injuries, and certainly something people need some training on. Sometimes a clinical consult can get us access to care because they have privileges at a hospital or they know people at a resource that they can connect us up with. And maybe they can also help facilitate getting us access to specialty services that we need. Okay, so that was a lot of content, really just important to share the burden and joy of supervision more broadly and with experts, with the team, with using the team to support each other. And we're going to have some discussions again and have a chance for you to talk about what are you doing that in your supervision. These are just prompts. You don't have to follow our questions. We know that you know that. What do you do more of? Do you doing more case conferencing? What does staff seem to need the most help with? We'd love to hear back from you on that because I think that'll help us inform the training. What's been effective for you in supervising? So these are just prompts. You could talk about really what's the state of supervision in your organization. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes for this or so. Yep.
Welcome back.
We have a couple people still in the room, so. Welcome back. Welcome back. We still have a few folks using their last few seconds to talk. We apologize that someone had to interrupt. Oh, we're dumping them in the room 4.
Mm.
Okay. Please back. Okay, welcome back, guys. I notice you almost all have your cameras on when you're meeting with each other, which we love. Hopefully you're making some new friends and making some new connections. You could leave your cameras on for us too. We won't judge you. Uh, so what came up? What are people doing? Did anybody hear anything interesting? Where does staff need the most help? We're very interested in that as we continue to develop more support for you guys. What has been working? Come on, a little boasting here. Come on, guys. You're not all that shy. Come on, Hebe. I'm gonna call you out
Hmm.
because I know you.
That's when
I'm
you
gonna
know
call it.
somebody.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes.
Um,
Sylvia's always there too. We can always
I
pull
know.
on her. But
Um, we talk about in general what is that we do for supervision, that the importance of consistency, accountability in both way.
Hmm.
Not just the supervisee is the responsible one, also the supervisor is the one that needs to be there and show up and role model for them from
Great.
the very beginning. So we talk about, struggling sometime with time. No, because you are not good with your time management. It's because of the nature of the job. Sometimes it gets chaotic and crazy. So you have the tendency to postpone the supervision, but in reality, it's very important to keep it as it is. Don't change it, even if the house is burning,
Yeah.
because it's crucial to provide the supervision to your supervisee. You never know what is the need of the person that's going to come that day. So, and that probably that day was the day that they needed the most, and you miss it, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
Yep.
uh, that's what we talk about it and how to keep that consistency. So we talk about some tips, like I share my own experience, how that I had a time that I have different reasons for me that I thought I was a good reason to miss that appointment with my supervisee, until I said, no, I'm going to create a system that I'm going to be loyal to that system. So, and it was
mm,
inserting my calendar, concurrent meeting, and that's established. They know, and also I'm making sure that I'm there on time, and my supervisees know that they need to be there on time, because otherwise they will get an email from me right away, 5 minutes after, asking
Mhm.
them, "Where are you? Are you coming?" Right? So we
yeah,
talk about that and the importance of documenting.
yeah, yeah. Oh, great. Well, thank you for sharing that, TV. I think that's really good feedback and experience about how you're really trying to keep that sacred time and the consistency for people. I think it's also, some people are easier to meet with than other people,
Yeah.
right? I'll just say that as a supervisor, we got to be real here. Part of me and Andrea is being real. David, I see you unmuted. Did that mean you were going
Yeah.
to share something?
One more thing,
Oh,
Susan. I think
go
it's
ahead,
very
Hebe.
important for us, especially when you're just meeting that person for, starting to build a partnership, building the partnership. That is
Yes.
something
Yeah,
that very important, and be able to trust your supervisor and your supervisee. But that is the result of building together.
absolutely. That trust is so important. It's really, really important that they can trust you. David and then Kiana.
Well, the only thing I would say is, the support that staff need most. I mean, we all are so reactive and to client needs all the time. I think one of the things I try to do is just, years ago I learned the difference between what's important and what's urgent, and try to keep
Yes.
people um, focus on some of the important things. And also, I've been doing a lot where uh, helping the folks I supervise just maintain some boundaries, saying, you don't have to be at someone's beck and call, making appointments. If somebody needs a ride, calls you up, says, I need a ride, try to teach them to say, I really can't respond. I'm not a taxi driver and so forth, and try to just bring a little bit of order. And that's, I guess, asking clients to do a little bit more too, and teach them that, the services we provide are not always on call, or uh, and so forth. So that takes some teaching.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's that's a really important point is how do we set boundaries and when is it an emergency? I think two really important questions, right? Like how do we, because we want to be helpful and we want to engage people, but and so we think, oh, well, I'll pick him up because maybe now he's going to talk to me, right? But if it's the policy that we want to really encourage people to get a ride a different way, then helping people set those boundaries in an appropriate way that doesn't make people feel bad, right? About setting that limit. And then also the difference between what's an urge, and I think this is so classic with staff, right? That, you know, you want to be responsive, and so you treat it as an emergency, like I have to take care of this now. And could you have waited a couple hours? Maybe. That's a good question for people to ask, right? Does it need to be done right now? Could it be done tomorrow? So Kiana, I saw your hand up and then it went down and now I don't, oh, there you are. Do
Oh
you
yeah,
want
I
to
was
share
just
some?
I just put it down because you had acknowledged me. That was all.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah.
some people in my group had talked about one person talked about sometimes they'll do their supervision meeting like in a different place, like meet somewhere else to, kind of minimize distractions or interruptions.
Yeah,
I thought that that was a good idea.
it's a really
Um,
good
Great.
idea.
Personally, I talked about how, sometimes with my team, I still do outreach with them at times. So sometimes we can, do outreach and, talk about supervision things at the same time. But I also acknowledge that, it's important to be able to sit down and like actually look at paperwork, pull up things on HMIS. So, you can't do that while doing outreach, but, sometimes we can talk about general things, get some things done, but of course not everything. But it's something is better than nothing as Ebe was discussing, consistency and at least trying to meet weekly or, set the meeting. And that's one thing I learned from my supervisor. You should set a regular meeting and you can always cancel the meeting, but at least it's there. The space is there for it, the time. So yeah, that was all.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I think going out on outreach with people is great. I mean, going back to the story I just told about learning how to hospitalize was watching somebody do it, really listening to the conversation and all the things they asked. And it can be a great way to teach. And a part of supervision, yes, is reviewing the notes, but part of it is teaching people to practice. And it is a practice, right? It's an interpersonal practice. And sometimes seeing how you engage with someone can be a great way for people to learn. And you also can see how your staff are doing, right? It's different for people to tell you how it's going versus seeing how it's going, seeing how they are with clients. Do they seem comfortable? Are they anxious? Or how are they using their body and their space when they're with people? Sometimes people need some help with that too, right? And also reading the situation and also safety. So I think going out on outreach with people is great. Definitely doesn't always have to be in the office. Great. Anybody else want to share anything? Thanks for sharing that, guys. Thanks for uh I think that's good
Helpful.
for everybody to hear. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I think I'm passing it back to you now, Andrea.
Yep. We're going to pick up on role plays. Yep.
Yes, with our picture of Homer.
Yes. You see Homer lying on the couch in his underwear with a beer on his belly. We want to go with staff to home visits because they don't know what to do in that situation, right? They don't know what to do in a lot of situations, is how to put boundaries up without putting them so high that people can't relate to you, how it's different in a home visit. We're going to talk about home visits in a minute. We're also going to do assessments and plans together, right? And we're going to struggle with them together and we're going to ask a lot of questions. The other thing that's really hard for supervisors sometimes is sometimes you just want to solve it for the people you work with. And we want to back that off and give people a chance to solve it themselves, right? Unless we really know the answer. If we really know the answer and we're seeing something that's pretty obvious to us, we do want to say it. We don't want people to think we're withholding that information, right? But we do want to give people a chance to solve it themselves. This really mirrors what we do with the people we serve. It's also, we want to conduct home visits. And, if we see Homer on the couch, what are we going to do and how are we going to handle it? And then we're going to rebrief it and talk to the person, the staff member afterwards and see what they're comfortable doing, right? We can chair meetings and share meetings. And as Suzanne said, sometimes we can give people an outline so they can present a case, those sorts of things. So we can help people get more adept at those skills, like chairing meetings and running classes, that sort of stuff. And sometimes we really need to do it together. Handling a crisis as a team is really important. We want to talk about it beforehand, what roles people are going to take. We want to debrief it afterwards. We want to help people. We want them to say what they think was, what they think worked and what they didn't think didn't work. I mean, I think a lot of times I learned most from supervisors, and I think my supervisees will learn most when something I did spectacularly didn't work. And we can talk about it afterwards, right? And say, okay, so what happened? And they can say, I think you missed this clue, or I think you missed that. And that's a really important thing because then people are problem solving it. We want to prepare for meetings. We want to prepare for meetings with clients by role playing them sometimes. We want to model interventions in meetings. Have you tried this? What does it look like when you try this? Not only for supervisors, but also for other staff and team meetings. And that, okay, at the end of this, it's, letting them critique our interventions. And that's particularly helpful because you know what? Not everything we do are they going to do. And God knows not everything we do works, right? So we want people to think about that and problem solve around that. And sometimes that's incredibly helpful. So we're going to talk a little bit about field visits. I do want to say something about the field visits. You want to talk to people about what are their concerns, what are their skills. You want to set some of those boundaries ahead of time with your whole team. Nothing screws up a team home visit quicker is if, let's say, you're not going to meet with somebody in their underwear and the rest of the team does. It's confusing to the client, it's confusing to the staff. So you want to get some agreement from all. You want some consistency around that. You want to talk about what people's role in the field is and also really encourage people to back off if they feel weird about it. If something is telling them to back off, pay attention. You can always get help. You can go out. You can ask for, a supervisor to come out. You can ask for other people to come out. You can ask for reinforcements. You can always do that, but you don't want to put yourself in a lot of danger. And this comes up to safety in the field. You want people to plan for the visit, right? And the other thing is the visits should be predictable. So getting a structure for home visits is a key part of supervision and is not something that people think about. I mean, frankly, when I first started doing home visits, it's like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? What happened this week? But you know what? I probably should have done something predictable, like certainly checked in with them, but also talked about what we planned to work on together and checked out if we could work on that together so that people know what we're coming there for. The other thing that's critically important is the first time people go do home visits, don't let them go alone, right? And certainly the first time they meet a client, they don't go alone. And you want to go out with them. You want to model behavior. It can also be done by other staff who are particularly good at this. And that's really helpful. Safety is really important. You also want to know, make sure they know the policies and procedures for safety in the field, like checking in before you go in and checking in afterwards. And also giving people some sort of context for it, right? I was always much more worried about when in outreach is when not when people were in the encampment, but when people were getting there and coming away. So I think that, really covering all of that, and also ensuring consistency so that the clients or participants we work with know what to expect. I would also periodically accompany people on home visits, not triggered by necessarily things aren't going well, though that probably should trigger it, but also when things are going really well, but also checking in and pointing out to people what their skills are, because we know outreach skills build over time. So you want to, talk about their competencies and you want to talk about what they're good at. And people aren't necessarily going to recognize that for themselves.
So, one thing with outreach is you're working with people, and it's field work and home visits. Like people may be living outside, but that may be their home too,
Yeah.
right? So you may be working with people once they're in housing and going into their unit. But when someone's living in a tent and you're going to visit, that is their home, right? But it's also field work. So they're kind of all together on the slide because there's very similar things about safety and about approach and about respect for, people's, and I know everyone here is very respectful, but what happens if you go and you have an appointment to meet with somebody and they are living outside and there's a big party going on, or they're totally inebriated, right? Or they're still in the tent and the tent is zipped up and it's not, the flaps aren't turned out and open like they're ready for the day. What do you do? Right. So there's a lot of subtlety in this because this is people's homes that they're living in. Often unless we're meeting them like at the food pantry or, at the van or at the medical clinic or whatever, that we're often in people's homes, even though it may not really be home that they were looking for them, rather than being in an apartment. But it is complex and knowing when to go in and when to back off. And I think that I'll just say that with maybe from personal experience more than anything, and maybe some people that I worked with who are very bold, they were not afraid of anything. And that is a very, very dangerous person who
Yep.
is not afraid of anything, right? The person who is not afraid, who thinks I'll be able to handle it, that's a good supervisory intervention, right? To talk about that. Well, you may not be afraid, and we get that, but in general, we don't advise people to do X, Y, or Z, whatever it is.
When I
Um,
became a supervisor, I used to pray every day I'd never get anybody like me when I was a new
yeah,
worker.
yeah, yeah,
And there was good reason for that.
yeah. So this is a really important topic, is just that whole way you carry yourself out in the field. And I know you guys, a lot of you do a lot of the work is in teams. People are rarely out on their own, or that's, if that it does happen, they are out alone. They're trying to always have two people, but so important for so many reasons.
So the other part of this, we talked a little bit about this, is helping people to access community resources and giving people sustainable resources and good connections for things that they need is really core to this practice. And that part of the job is to make sure that these resources are working with the person. And sometimes that can look weird to the resource. I've had resources say, "What are you, my supervisor now?" Because you're checking up on them and you're checking up to make sure that things work. And teaching people how to do that with some grace is tough, but also backing people up is really important. They also need training on options, and we got to share resources. So, full disclosure, when I was a case manager, I shared no resources. So that because I wanted my clients to come first. And you know how they fixed that? They made me a supervisor, and then there was no choice. So I think that that was an issue, right? We want people to share resources. We want to work as a team. It's a tough thing to do as a supervisor. And so that's one of the things that we want to do. We also want to visit those programs and get a feel for them. I want to give you an example is there was a group that we worked with in Los Angeles, and people were going to this mental health clinic, and the directors of the mental health clinic had come over to the shelter and had a great conversation with them about what they supply and stuff, and they were very comfortable with that. And none of the clients wanted to go back. None of them. And so finally, they went over to that program and they were telling me this story, and it turns out it was built on the I don't know. There was an underground thing. So when you went in for your session, you went underground for 5 floors and there were no windows down there, and it completely freaked people out. And they wish they'd known that. Could they have prepared people for that? Maybe, but they really found another clinic. So that knowing the resources and knowing what you can use is really important. And that, also realizing that, as Suzanne said, sometimes people are taught not to bring problems to their supervisors, particularly with resources, and especially, okay, so you guys have Molly who has asked you to follow up on some of these resources. And that's the other thing you're trained about is never tell your funder if there's a problem, right? Because you're not going to rat anybody out. Well, throw all that out, right? First of all, Molly's very graceful in how she approaches people, but she really, yeah, there we go. In all caps, please tell me if there's a problem. Please tell her if there's a problem. And that's something you also want to tell your supervisor about and get people involved. Look, I mean, everybody has caseloads based on what the job is. And if you do everybody else's job, it's not a service to your clients or anybody else. And other people are being paid to do these jobs, and that maybe they need some help, right? So let's make sure that we take a look at patterns. We try to resolve the problem ourselves first, but absolutely tell Molly, tell your supervisor, tell your supervisees that you want people to talk about if there's problems, and talk about how people can be helpful with those issues. You're going to, it could be a memorandum of understanding. It could be, your senior staff meets with them. It could be all sorts of things. It could be switching to another resource, but you want to know that stuff. Does that make sense? Sorry, I got on my soapbox a little bit there.
Well, and sometimes it's a great resource, right?
Yeah.
So the other side
Yeah.
is
That you
coming
want to share
back and
too.
saying something is great, or we found something new, and we want to, we want to get that feedback back. But I know for me, I didn't not like to refer people to places I had never seen,
Yeah.
but I kind of got over it if somebody on my team had seen the place and could describe it to me. But I think that can be a real barrier, because we can't say, hey, you're going to get there, it's going to be a line. You're going to wait.
Yeah.
There's going to be 50 people in the waiting room, for example. These kinds of things that we can help prepare people for managing resources. Because part of the goal, too, is for people to have a house and a network of care and support. And so, us helping them negotiate and navigate resources is preparing them for that. How are you going to do with the waiting room? You don't like to wait. But we always know you always have to wait at this place. So how are you going to do it? Are you going to play a game on your phone? What are you going to do? So we want to be able to help people manage resources. It's not easy, as you guys know. You wait online, you're going to the office, and they don't say we're going to take you at 10:30. You just wait, maybe all day sometimes, right? Lots of awful things go on with the different community resources. So we really have to do a lot of prep work with staff and clients as well.
So we're going to talk a little bit about prep work, and we want to clarify our expectations on roles. We want to make sure that they're clear to the client. We want to practice some of this stuff. We want to make sure that staff understands what housing options are available and what the application process is and who gets prioritized and how you manage that system and what's unpredictable and what's predictable, so that they can prepare people for that. The unpredictable part is usually the hardest part with staff. So you want to talk about that a little bit. It's also, what their role is in the transition process, how much they're going to follow up with people. How do you do a warm handoff? Are you going to visit the person in housing? How do you work with landlords, property managers? What kind of support can you provide to people even before they move in and when they're making their decisions, right? It's not only knowing the place, but knowing what the expectations of the place are. And that a lot of those are basic tenant rights and responsibilities, reasonable accommodations, eviction process, just preparing people to problem solve these issues as they come up is really important, and giving them a chance to practice them as much as possible so that people can handle these things as they come up.
And they can begin to educate the people they're working with
Absolutely.
around the expectations of the housing, what they can expect from a landlord, what tenants' rights and responsibilities are. Right? That's an important part. Reasonable accommodations to come up a lot here, but I like for an animal, that might be a situation. If you have somebody who has a pet outside, that might be
Yeah.
a situation where they're needing a reasonable accommodation. So we want to make sure staff are conversant enough. They're not saying they have to be lawyers, but they should know these basic things, right? And what can people ask in an interview, what they can't, what they still will ask it. But we really want to socialize and make sure staff are aware of this, right? What landlord discretion is, how the subsidies work, if they're getting a housing subsidy, if it's rapid rehousing, that it's time limited, right? So there's a lot of stuff on the housing side that outreach workers need to know, even though they're not running the housing, but they need to access it. So they really need to know what's out there. And I just keep thinking about the population, and we've been talking about this at Housing Innovations a lot too, about what are the other resources besides rapid rehousing and PSH, right? And How do we get, especially we have more seniors in the homeless population, can we access some of those 202s or senior buildings? So there's a lot of housing content that workers need to know, and that's a part, maybe that's not you, maybe that's somebody in your can does that, explains that, or maybe that's somebody else in the organization, but having people with housing knowledge is going to be really important for them to be legitimate with the clients,
Yep.
to see them as being able to help them. And the reality is most people are not going to get a resource from the system, right? They're not going to get
Mm-hmm.
PSH or rapid rehousing. So we have limited resource. So we want to also talk to staff about that and about being creative and trying to find another solution. Maybe it's a shared housing arrangement, maybe it's renting a room in a house, but the whole piece of housing, we're expecting staff to be the most thing that they're talking about a lot with the clients. Then they need to have something to talk about, right? So they're going to need that education on that piece. Makes me think about maybe that should be something we incorporate into some of the outreach sessions. Is do people know what the different housing options are and what the differences are? I don't know, maybe you guys could weigh in on that in the chat if you have thoughts.
You also want to provide people with access to education and training that fit their interest and fit the outcomes and the program design. And trainings are often a critical part of that and the support for staff, but a lot of this is absolutely reinforced through team meetings and supervision. Training only does so much. It's really help with the implementation that's really helpful. You can use the recordings from the best practice series to do some training yourself if people are unable to attend. And one of the things that we found is particularly helpful is if the supervisor at least debriefs the training with people or even watches parts of it with people, or a senior staff does, so they can answer questions, they can try some of the implementation, they can have these conversations. Just the recording trainings, I mean, it's pretty deadly to watch these recording trainings, sorry, but it's true. Try to watch these recording trainings for, 2 hours in your office or less than 2 hours because we have some breaks for these, but it's hard to keep your concentration, particularly if everything's going on around you. So doing it with people can be really helpful. You can see the slide in the resources section at the end of this PowerPoint for existing topics and links to a lot of the training resources. That's really important. So Sylvia says we created a culture of sharing, and then Greater New Haven, we work so hard to do this by, wait a minute, you cut out there. Sylvia, you just want to say it?
My stuff is cutting out too, but we recognize that everyone who's out there belongs to all of us.
Yes.
So, like, you're not losing anything by sharing it with another agency. You're just moving a person on so that there's, but
and
I
that's
just
that's absolutely true. And that sharing those resources is going to be really, really important. And every homeless person that moves off the streets is a tribute to everybody in that system.
Yeah.
No, it's a good way to go. You can provide some training in-house that offer opportunities. I mean, you are welcome to use any of the PowerPoints if those are helpful.
Well, and staff doing training might be a professional development opportunity. I will just say that's how I started training. I wanted to be a trainer. I was terrified of training, and I did some trainings in-house and got started that way. They were not good, but it was a professional development opportunity, and some people want that.
Give people a chance, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about self-care, okay? And Suzanne talked about this, and there's some critical elements of self-care. People have got to be able to take a break, right? Not only during the day, but also to take a vacation day, to take a sick day. That's really important, right? And that we've got to set it up through everything we do so that's possible, and that they don't come back to a whole pile of work and nothing has been done when they're gone, right? So that's the way to get people not to take any sick days, right? You're going to also look and see. Sylvia says, no, get back to work. That's a
Great,
joke.
get back to work.
Yeah. so that you want to make sure you want to check in with people, see how they're feeling. Everybody has a bad day, right? Everybody has a day when they're struggling with stuff. They may need to take a break. They may need to try something else for a couple hours that might also be of use to the program, but maybe a little bit less on the front lines. You want to, encourage the staff to ask for help and tell you what's going on. You want to also encourage rest, right? And I know this is really tough because I bet some of the people you supervise have two jobs, and that worries me, right? So, I mean, we advocate for an increase in salary, we advocate in that sort of stuff, but ways people have handled two jobs, I mean, two jobs are tough. And they usually have three jobs because they're usually a parent at home, right? So that's a lot for people to deal with. You're gonna encourage people to rest, encourage people to take days off, encourage people to, try some stress reduction techniques. In some places, they make a meditation course or a yoga course available to the staff. Any of that sort of stuff to help people manage stress. It's also talking to your supervisor and talking to you, giving people an opportunity to socialize with each other and talk about what's going on in their life is a major stress reduction technique. That connecting with others, it's also team building things that are fun. If there's joy in the work and you're giving people things that are fun, and this is not just with your staff, but it's also with the tenants you serve or the clients you serve, is giving people a chance to have a good time is really important. That whole reinforcement of doing a good job and feeling really reinforcing people's competencies, that's huge. That helps people cope. But you also want to give people a chance to feel the joy in the work and the fun. Part of it is celebrating successes and asking people how they want to do that. Some people use call outs in their team meetings. Like, thank you, Hebe, for doing this I saw you do this with Joey, and you know what? That really helped me, and I really appreciate it. And he was working on my last nerve, and you got him to calm right down. And I don't know how you did that, but I want to talk about it, right? Those are great things, right? And really shouting out to other people about things you've learned from them. Other things that people have done, there is a webinar called
Just one
Supporting
thing
Staff
that, yeah,
Resiliency. Yeah.
just the flexible schedules. We
Oh,
cruise
yeah.
by that. And I think that's a really, especially people who do have two jobs, if you can do it, where you can do it. Outreach does have unusual hours sometimes, so we can be more flexible. But I just wanted to call that out, because I think that's something that, again, and we might be able to do it, but maybe we have to fight with administration like we would have had to at our agency before. But something certainly that can make a real big difference, like an hour later or an hour earlier could make a big difference in somebody's life, especially if they have other things going on. Our time is
Absolutely.
flying, Andrea, so we have 2 minutes left.
Yep. So, we're gonna think about maybe in your team meetings to share what your program as agency is doing about self-care. Have the self-care conversation both with the people you serve and others. And what do you do to nurture the staff, and what does the staff do to nurture themselves and each other? And it's a good conversation to have in your team meetings because we're running out of time here.
I don't
Um,
know if anybody wants to add something to the chat of
yeah,
what they're doing to promote
yes.
self-care or build motivation or put gas in the tank. We'd love to hear, even if you just put one or two things that you're doing that have been working.
Those are really helpful.
We want to get you out of here on time. I'm not going to even read the closing side because I'm going to just say you guys are so important in this work, but you don't
Yes.
have to do it all. And staff are motivated by the mission, and we want to jump right on that and work with them to achieve that mission and to remember that we also need support. So you also need to practice self-care. I'm not seeing chat popping with lots of things for
No.
self-care, but I know it's the end of 2 hours and you're ready on to the next thing. So really fast, additional resources. We have the street outreach standards link in here for you. There's few live links if you have not connected with those. We have the recordings from the best practices series, which if you not seen them or you want to have work or so, you can have slides in the recordings. We are doing safety on outreach. Tentative date right now is 6/9 at 1:30. It's looking like that might end up being a 2-session training. We're trying to finish the curriculum before we schedule it, but it'll be in June. There's a community of practice in June 4th from 10 to 11. That's a chance to bring case challenges forward. Molly and her famous quarterly outreach meetings, which are great to get and share resources and issues. Sorry, typo there, but June 10th is the next one, and then September 16th and December 9th. And then here is the inventory of training. The link is here, and there's tons of stuff, and we keep adding more for you to use or with your staff. And then here's some other resources that you can take advantage of. And there's our contact information. If you need to reach out to anybody, feel free. And we are at the wrap up 1 minute late. We apologize. It is your time. We don't like to go over. So anybody want to say anything?
I
Ask
have a
anything?
request. I have a request.
Okay.
I'd love to hear it.
Yes, I heard this from my staff. In some areas, Columbus House traditionally has served always individual, but now with things that are changing, now we're facing for them, they feel very challenged because now they're facing families. So they would like to see some trainings for, now serving to families when